Hi, I'll continue with paragraph 18 of the chapter on Appoggiaturas in Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art das Klavier zu spielen. Alle diese Vorschläge, nebst ihren Abzügen, wenn sie zumal häufig vorkommen, tun besonders bei sehr affektuosen Stellen gut, indem der letztere oft mit einem Pianissimo gleichsam verluscht. Figur 14. Bei anderen Gelegenheiten aber würden sie den Gesang zu matt machen, wenn sie nicht als den entweder die Vorläufer von lebhafteren Manieren wären, welche die folgende Note bekommt, oder selbst noch einen Zusatz von anderen Zieraten annehmen. So here's figure 14. And you can see at the end there, Bach has written in the PP, the pianissimo sign, attributed to the E, and is thereby indicating what he's talking about the Abzug, or the main note. It's extinguishing the Appoggiatura with a pianissimo. And you can see in that phrase that even though it's a short phrase, you can see how the Appoggiatura and the Appoggiaturas, the two of them, and their Abzüge, they play an important part in the expressiveness of the phrase. And affectuosen, I'm not exactly sure in a final translation, but it could potentially mean emotional or passionate as well, but I chose expressive. And here's how it sounds. So in this paragraph, Bach is introducing the element of the aspect of ornamenting both the Appoggiatura and their Abzüge. So how he leads us into that is he's basically describing the world of music. And it further helps understand the phenomenon of the Vorschlag and its Abzug, or the Appoggiatura and the pull-off. So if you're out of the cage and in the world of music, when you experience that phenomenon of the Appoggiatura or the Vorschlag and its Abzug, it means with what Bach is telling you there, you're going to recognize it. You'll remember Bach's words and you'll experience that for yourself when you're in the world of music and out of the cage, and you'll go, oh yes, this is what I found what Bach was describing. And I think the pianissimo comes from, with the Abzug, that comes from experiencing the phenomenon of the Vorschlag and its Abzug, so the Appoggiatura and its pull off in its purest form. And when you really like draw out the note off the Appoggiatura, the following note off the Appoggiatura, and when you follow that kind of that line of sound, it'll be very often pianissimo what you're dealing with in the Abzug. And I would hazard a guess that, to further clarify what Bach says about it being too dull, that if you think of that pianissimo, the purest experience of the Appoggiatura is like as if time stands still. And, you know, this supersedes everything. This is above everything. Time and rhythm and all that phenomenon of the Vorschlag. And to listen to that or have that all the time, it would be like watching somebody nodding off constantly. And so in order to counteract that, you will either ornament the Appoggiatura or the following note. And that takes that centers it more, takes the extremes, the gulf between the Appoggiatura and the Abzug. It's not so extreme, and so you can continue easier with that. You're not so, you know, you're not always coming to a halt. And the other thing is that if you have a, you know, if every phrase you play is profound, it's the same as, you know, nothing being profound in terms of, you know, art or entertainment or whatever. It's got to do with contrast. And so in order for something to be profound, it needs contrast. And so the ornaments help take, you know, they help keep it centered. And so this paragraph is great insight into Bach's understanding of ornamentation and how livelier ornaments relate to the Appoggiatura and its Abzug. So a very important paragraph. And I have to mention the, you know, the experts who've said that the Appoggiatura is written in so that people like you and me don't ornament the note. If this could be seen as the final showdown, their last stand here. And this is a blow to them, because what we're hearing in this paragraph is that the Appoggiatura can be ornamented. Deswegen trägt man die folgende Note gerne simpel vor, wenn sie einen ausgezierten Vorschlag gehabt hat. Diese Einfalt wird durch das gewöhnliche diesen Noten zukommende Piano glücklich erhalten. Ein simpel vorgetragener Vorschlag hingegen leidet gerne eine ausgezierte Folge. Wegen des letzteren Falles besehe Figur 15 A und wegen des ersten B. So here's figure 15A, and this is an example of how a plainly executed ornament gladly suffers or bears an embellished continuation. And there you can see the two appoggiaturas. One is followed, the first one, the D, followed by the C, has got a trill attached to it. The C has got a trill attached to it, so the Abzug is ornamented. And in the next one, the D is ornamented with an inverted mordant after the plainly executed Appoggiatura, which is a C. And this is another issue now with that, what the experts will tell you, that the Appoggiatura is there so people like you and me don't ornament it. What about the following note? A plainly executed Appoggiatura, which, when you think of the roll of honour, or all these experts, all those appoggiaturas in the first movements of Mozart's sonatas or any of the classical repertoire, or in any movement, all those that are played as normally semiquavers, they are, even though they're not, like I've said, they're just played as normal semiquavers, they're not actually appoggiaturas the way the people on the roll of honour do them, or the way the experts understand them. They don't know anything about the Abzug. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, they're plainly ornamented, or they're plainly executed appoggiaturas. That would mean there would be a greater likelihood of somebody like you or me ornamenting the following note. So what did Mozart or any of these composers do to protect against us decorating the following note? It's the same as, you know, making sure, leaving the house and making sure your front door is locked, but leaving all the windows open. So they protected the note itself. And if you imagine the catastrophe if beginners or students or people like you and me were to ornament all those notes Mozart wrote in as a small note, as an appoggiatura, that had he not taken the precaution of stopping us from doing that, you can imagine the catastrophe it would be if you think of it, the first movement of a Mozart sonata. Well, were we to instead ornament every note that comes after an appoggiatura, the catastrophe of that would be of equal proportions to the other. It would just be displaced the space of a semiquaver for the most part, or a 16th note. But the extent of the damage done will be the same. Yet, nothing was done to prevent that. So, the front door was locked, but all the windows were left open. And the experts who say the appoggiatura is there so people like you or me don't ornament it, you have not heard from them what about the following note. And of course you couldn't ask them that because you weren't aware of it either to ask, but you could ask them that now. What about the following note? Is there not an even greater risk that people like you and me, or beginners or students, will ornament every single note following that follows an appoggiatura. And surely, they love to mention Leopold Mozart and his school for violin, or Quantz and his school for flutes. Surely they, they mentioned that sort of hole in their defenses. The fact that the note following the appoggiatura now becomes vulnerable to an unwanted ornament. And so you think what they'd have to do if they want to prevent the people from ornamenting the following note is that they'd have to write the second note in as a small note too. But they didn't. And yet there hasn't been an epidemic of students, beginners, people like you or me ornamenting those notes following the appoggiaturas in a fast movement of a Mozart sonata. And why not? It's because that danger doesn't exist. There is no danger that a beginner is going to ornament themselves any notes of a Mozart allegro. Just as there was no danger that they'd ornament the notes following the appoggiaturas in a fast movement of a Mozart sonata. It's like putting on a suit of armour every day. And if you're made put that suit of armour on by somebody, and you ask them, why do I have to wear the suit of armour? And they tell you it's so you don't get eaten by a dinosaur. You can know that there's something, it's never going to happen. There's a 0 chance that you're going to get eaten by a dinosaur. So the protection against that is completely senseless. So that doesn't look too good for those experts with the appoggiaturas there, so people like you or me don't ornament it. And you can see as well, when you think of what Bach says about relate this example 15a to and the way the Abzug, the continuation is ornamented, that when you relate it to the first part of that paragraph, the way the appoggiatura is extinguished with a pianissimo, and this would be, I would say, the purest form, the purest experience of the phenomenon of an appoggiatura. Those appoggiaturas are extinguished with a pianissimo, and that'd be too dull, like you're watching somebody constantly nodding off, that it's always coming to a halt and starting, and that you want to keep it going and save those moments till they really have effect, rather than having them all the time and destroying their effect. That the ornament on the following note counteracts that pianissimo. It raises the liveliness, the intensity of it, and so it's like an injection. So you're not nodding off. You have the appoggiatura, but it's sooner ready for the next event. And so those ornaments following the appoggiatura are combating that pianissimo and preserving that pianissimo for those moments where you can get the maximum effect from it. And here's figure 15b. And this, you can see there, the Appoggiatura is written in as a small note. And above that is the sign of a turn. So Bach wants you to play that Appoggiatura with a turn before the B. And so here you see an Appoggiatura decorated, ornamented. And it didn't matter that it was written in as a small note. It's still been ornamented. So maybe nobody told Bach about that rule. Maybe Bach needed educating. And from that paragraph, you can, from what Bach says, that you can see as well, or you could understand when you experience the Appoggiatura, how an ornamented Appoggiatura helps the process. That the ornament, the livelier ornament attached to the Appoggiatura will give it more weight, more volume, more substance, which makes the piano that comes with the Abzug easier to preserve, because you're going from a greater activity to a quieter one. And that an ornamented Appoggiatura helps facilitate the process, the phenomenon of the Appoggiatura and its Abzug, because it's the Abzug. It's the Abzug that's the crucial element. It's the Abzug that makes the Appoggiatura. An Appoggiatura can't exist without the Abzug. Whereas an Abzug, you can turn a normal note into a. Let's say you play a note and you don't intend it to be an Appoggiatura. But if you decide right after you've played that note, I want it to be an Appoggiatura after all, well, it's the next note that will make that an Appoggiatura if you are able to draw it off that note. Then that note, even though you never intended it to be an Appoggiatura, that becomes an Appoggiatura. But you can play an Appoggiatura intending it to be an Appoggiatura, and you play the next note just like another note, and it's not an Abzug. Well, then that note you've played wasn't an Appoggiatura at all, because it needs the Abzug to exist. They are not, one is not, you can't separate one from the other. The one without the other doesn't exist. Diese Ausschmückung der Vorschläge, indem sie oft neue kleine Nötchen erfordert, ist Ursache zu anderen in der Folge erklärten Manieren. Und man pflegt also in diesem Falle diese Vorschläge gerne als ordentliche Noten in den Takt mit einzuteilen. C. Bei langsamen Stücken kann zuweilen der Vorschlag sowohl als die folgende Note ausgeschmückt sein. D. So here's figure 15C. And you can see Bach has written in the Appoggiatura is the C and the Abzug is the B. And Bach has written it in equal to this Appoggiatura in equal to the other notes, and has divided it up with them in the bar. And that Appoggiatura is decorated with an ornament, and you can see that ornament, the added ornament, as well consists of small notes. And so this could be, maybe this is a comeback chance for those experts who tell you that the Appoggiatura is written in as a small note so that people like you and me don't ornament it. That they'll go, see, ha, when it's decorated, Bach says people are gladly write it as a big note and divide it up in the bar because it gets other small notes attached to it. So those experts can say if it's divided up, if it's written out as a big note in the bar when it's ornamented, therefore when it's written as a small note, it's not meant to be ornamented. And you know, maybe they have a fighting chance here with that argument. The only problem is the experts, that wasn't said with the idea that only certain appoggiaturas aren't ornamented. That was said in the understanding that no appoggiaturas are ornamented. Therefore, to make it an appoggiatura prevents anybody from being able to ornament the note. And what you get on the page, the notes are just representative of what happens in reality. And so whether you write an appoggiatura as a big note and divided it up with the other notes in the bar, or you write it as a small note, the nature of that appoggiatura doesn't change. It's the exact same phenomenon in reality, regardless how it's notated on the page. The notes only represent the reality. They are not the reality. So that appoggiatura is no difference between those two types of appoggiatura. They're exactly the same. Meaning that in reality, if the one can be ornamented, so can the other. So why you'd write it out big in the bar and divide it up is that you don't have an excess of small notes, and then you can't differentiate. Like you take this ornament here in C, if you have the appoggiatura then written in as another small note, you know, suddenly all the small notes start to look like they belong together, and you don't, and you can't. It's not so easy to tell that the one that it represents two separate ornaments and not just the one ornament that's comprised of small notes. And if you're adding your own ornaments according to your own whim in a Mozart sonata, you're not writing them down, so it doesn't matter that those appoggiaturas have been written in with small notes, because you're not writing in the appoggiatura. So you can ornament that appoggiatura as you like, or not as you like, but you can ornament that appoggiatura because appoggiaturas can be ornamented. And you're not going to have the confusion of all these little notes, because you're anyway not writing in the ornament because you're adding them yourself. It's not because it's indicated by the composer, but you're taking it up on your own accord to ornament those notes. And so this is how C sounds. And here's figure 15D. And so this is that example where Bach says that in slow pieces, not only can the appoggiatura be ornamented, but also the Abzug. And so here's an example of that the appoggiatura has its own ornament, and then the Abzug has a trill. So a very clear message from Bach is that appoggiaturas can be ornamented. So the comeback chance wasn't, they took a swing but they hit themselves in the face. Appoggiaturas are still ornamented. Dem ungeachtet pflegt man die Vorschläge oft deswegen in den Takt mit einzuteilen, damit weder sie noch die folgende Note ausgezehrt werden. E. So here's figure 15E, and you can see the two appoggiaturas, the C at the beginning of the bar and then the D on the third beat of the bar, and they're written out equal to the other notes and divided up with them in the bar. And why has that been done? So that neither it nor the following note are ornamented. So that's it. That's the knockout punch for these experts. The only reference Bach makes to any precaution of preventing people like you and me from ornamenting an appoggiatura is the exact opposite of what the experts are telling you. They're written out in the bar. Not as small notes, but as big notes in the bar in order to stop us from ornamenting it. And whereas the experts, they'll only tell you about the appoggiatura itself, you will not have heard. And it doesn't matter if you go to you're paying through your nose to attend an elite music school. You will not have heard them say anything about the following note. And they got it, like I said, they get it 180 degrees wrong. It's the mirror image of what the right answer should be. They are looking at everything from the cage out instead of being in the world of music and seeing it from the proper perspective. They're looking at it from the outside, or in their case, they're the ones trapped in the cage, so they're on the inside. But they are not. They do not possess it and are looking out from that. So they get it exactly wrong. The furthest point from the right answer is where they are. The opposite. If you think 2 points on a circle directly opposite each other, the second point is the furthest point from that first point. Any shift left or right and that point gets closer to the other point. And that is where the experts are. They got it completely wrong. And now the onus is on them. They have to say, no, Bach is wrong. He's gotten it wrong. And you can see that you should be more eager, you should think it's more pressing that they convince you Bach is wrong than it is than me convincing you the experts are wrong. And then they'll say, yeah, but what about Mozart's violin school or Quant's school for flutes? For one thing, I mean, I read through Mozart's violin school, but I wouldn't say I know what's in it because I didn't look at it properly enough. But I would have a strong suspicion, one, these experts, if they looked in it, they took a fleeting look at it, and that they misinterpreted what was being said. I would hold that as a possibility. But another thing I'd say, if you hire a plumber who got all his knowledge from a book written by an electrician, well then, don't be surprised if your plumbing doesn't work. You should be hiring a plumber who got all his knowledge from a book written by a plumber. And not only a book written by a plumber, but a book written by one of the best plumbers ever to have lived. And you can see Bach, not only this is the only reference to, what's being done to prevent anybody not from ornamenting, Appoggiaturas. You can see as well, while the experts never even thought about the note following, will be coming up, and I'll bet the first answer, if you were to question them and say, what about the following note? The number one response that they'll have, because they're not going to tell you the truth and say, oops, I don't know, and I think you've found me out here. No, they will say, oh, it was understood at the time that small note also meant the following note, even though you bringing it up to them will be the first time they've ever heard in their whole careers of that the following note is gladly ornamented. When the Appoggiatura has been plainly executed, they'll say, oh, that was implied. But yet there was not one mention of it when they brought up that rule, when they bring up Leopold Mozart, and they might even have the audacity to call it the Bach school and bring up this book to shut you up knowing that you don't know what's in this book. But the thing is, you do know, you are learning what's in this book. You have a better idea of what's in this book from these videos than all the experts, than the leading expert. You are going to know what's in this book better than what they do, because that paragraph 18, because they're in the cage, because they don't exist in the world of music, that will have meant nothing to them. Or a paragraph 20 when he says the reason for these, this is reason for other ornaments that will be explained later. That should be ringing alarm bells, and that should be something you remember, that part of that sentence. Remember that Bach says that for the future, because there is more insight. Ask the experts, why should that bit of that sentence be ringing alarm bells, and let them explain to you the significance of that. They won't be able to. But when Bach said that about the measures taken to prevent, he included the following note. He was aware of the fact that it's there to prevent you from ornamenting both the Appoggiatura and the following note. So the precaution was made. It was mentioned. Whereas the experts who says the small note is to prevent us from ornamenting it made no mention of the following note, or to prevent disaster striking, in that every beginner ornaments every following note of all the Appoggiaturas in a Mozart in the fast movement of a Mozart sonata. So I don't know. It just you can see that's Lilliput, and that's the standard that Lilliput is at. It's just pathetic. And maybe you see from this just how pathetic they are, how superficial their understanding is. They have zero understanding. They're just parroting. I mean, we're getting diluted. I don't know how many generations it's been now that any insight, any knowledge has been taken over by Lilliput and diluted and turned into this insipid, pile of nothing. But you can see the level they're at. If you listen to experts and you don't want to, consider what it is I'm presenting, what it is Bach is telling you, if you rather side with the experts, a tip I would give would be, whatever they tell you, do the opposite, because you have a better chance of the opposite being correct than what it is, than what they're telling you. If they tell you to play loud, play soft. If they tell you to play a diminuendo, play a crescendo. Because there is a good chance that what they are telling you is exactly the opposite of what the correct answer is. Just like that was the opposite of that saying or reason. That the Appoggiaturas are written in a small note so we don't ornament them, was the complete opposite of the right answer. And a half-baked opposite. Because, like I said, it's like a house with all the windows closed but the front door wide open. Or with the front door shut and all the windows wide open. What will Mozart have done to prevent people like you and me from ornamenting not only the Appoggiatura but also the Abzug? He'll have written the Appoggiatura out equal to the other notes and he'll divide it up with them in the bar. And that's what he will have done to prevent the Appoggiatura and both the Appoggiatura and the following note from being ornamented. He'll have done the exact opposite than what the experts claim he's done to prevent such ornamentation from happening. So, take a bow, experts. This you can earn your round of applause. There's a lot of insight in what Bach said there, has shared with us in those paragraphs as to the nature of the ornaments, the relationship between the Appoggiatura and its Abzug. And if you look, if you connect it to what Bach says regarding ornaments in general and what their function, what they do, you will see how a lot of those are fulfilled in what Bach says in those paragraphs. So very useful paragraphs in terms of discovering the truth, escaping the cage, and leaving Lilliput. Leave it to the Lilliputians who want to tell you that ornaments or appoggiaturas are there so people like you and me don't ornament those notes. Obviously, Bach was wrong. He has to be. Somebody has to be wrong. The experts and Bach can't both be right, because the one contradicts the other. Bach contradicts the experts in so many ways. He contradicts them in that he says appoggiaturas can be ornamented. Not only that, the ornamentation of the appoggiaturas happily facilitates the Abzug, the piano that the Abzug gets. The Abzug being ornamented happily counteracts the phenomenon of the appoggiatura and the way it can be extinguished or die out with a pianissimo. That keeps, it's like an injection, keeping it alive, waking the person up, keeping it moving. So the melody doesn't get too dull. Bach ornamented the appoggiatura written out as a small note. Something the experts tell you can't be done. And Bach says the opposite, that the appoggiaturas are written out as big notes and divided up with the other notes in the bar when they're not to be ornamented. Whereas the experts tell you when the appoggiaturas aren't to be ornamented, they're written as small notes. They're exactly the opposite. They can't both be right. The experts need to explain to you why Bach is wrong with all of that of what he said now in those paragraphs. There's so many things that are clearly wrong what Bach has said. The experts need to explain to you, convince you that Bach really was wrong and that it's not them who are as far from the correct answer as one can possibly be. And it's great again. I mean, Bach, he just doesn't, he sets it up, he explains why. He gives the insight so that you can understand why, not only why you're ornamenting, but as well the function, the role of the ornaments, the livelier ornaments, the sense they make. He gives us insight into his understanding. It's incredible. You get to think like Bach. You get to see ornaments and understand them like Bach understands them. And not like the experts. How many people have heard that explanation as a kid and thought it's stupid? You'll have asked, why didn't Mozart just write it in as a normal semiquaver? And when you hear the answer, you'll think that's stupid, and you'll think, you'll attribute that stupidity to Mozart and the people at the time of Mozart. And that's wrong, because the person in authority or the expert is telling you is not at all right. So what you're thinking is stupid is the expert themselves and not Mozart, because it has nothing to do with Mozart or the people at the time. It has to do, this is an invention of those experts, and it is their stupidity you're feeling and not the stupidity of Mozart. And that as well then undermines I mean, that promotes this idea that all the, you know, we're superior to people in the past. But we're not. What we are experiencing is the stupidity of the experts and not the stupidity of Mozart. And what the explanation that the experts provide as well, what it does is it stops you considering the Appoggiatura. None of the people on the Roll of Honour consider the Appoggiatura. It's all done and dusted. It's what the experts with their explanation tell you is, don't give this a single further thought. Just completely dismiss it. Consider it as a normal semiquaver. End the story. They stop you, and you can, looking at these videos, you know you have a lot to consider with Appoggiaturas, and they're not to be dismissed with some dumb, superficial rule that they just pulled out of their ass. And I'll bet it's, if I were to take a look at that Leopold Mozart school, I'd figure out what Mozart was really, what his dad was really saying. And even there, the experts who love to, you know, give that, drop that and that book and that name. That it would really show them up. But it doesn't. When you hear an expert repeat that rule, that idea about the Appoggiatura, you know they're from Lilliput. You know they're in the cage. And you know they are absolutely and completely and utterly wrong. And maybe they should quit their job. Maybe all those in the elite universities, they should all quit their jobs. And maybe the people who hired them should as well quit their jobs. And maybe the president of those universities should quit their jobs. Because you paid them and you didn't get any of this insight. None of it. What you got was misinformation and being led up the garden path, so that not only are you denied the right answer, but you're encouraged to be an idiot. You're encouraged not to think, not to consider the Appoggiatura, to dismiss it as nothing, as a fanciful notion of people who were just not as intelligent as we are, just as simpletons, who did all crazy things like ornament notes in a fast movement of a Mozart sonata. Not because they were so good and so skilled, but because they were so bad. It's absurd. It's farcical. It's a comedy. But you've heard it here. You see them destroyed, those experts and those false statements you're fed. well, that's it. I'll continue with more paragraphs. We're getting to the end of, approaching the end of the chapter on Appoggiaturas. So I'll continue in the next video. Thanks. Bye.